Alright, everyone, we're going to be getting ready here for this week's episode of Completion Critique. So, everyone's having a great week. So, for those of you new, each week on Completion Critiques, we review the indie game or just the completion rates and achievement rates of games to see what we can learn about how people were interested in a game, did games retain players, and what we can see in terms of any kind of pain points or churn rates. And while I have Super Meat Boy up, it is the wrong Meat Boy, as we need to go back to the original. As this week, it is the battle of the hardcore platformers. And one of the biggest examples of that is Super Meat Boy, the game that was made famous by Indie Game the Movie, the breakout success of Team Meat and Edmund McMillan, and a game that I am sure anyone who has played or studied indie games over the last decade has probably looked into at one point or another. It is an incredibly hard game, lots of achievements, lots of updates. And the question is, will this game have a better churn rate or better completion rates compared to some of the other challenging games that we've seen, such as Celeste, Sekiro, Resident Evil, and the like? But as I said, this was the game that really kind of began this. Braid and Fez were the three games that kind of really pushed indie games into the popular zeitgeist. And interestingly, all three of them were platformers, and they couldn't be further apart from one another. And Super Meat Boy is definitely the most challenging of the three. And this one I am very interested in. Now, before we go to that, just very quickly, this game sits at over 21,000 reviews on Steam. So that means that far more people than that have probably bought and played the game. Now, the one thing that I am not sure of, and I think what may kind of fudge these results to some extent, is when did achievements get added into the Steam version? Because I want to say they were in there from the very beginning, but I am not 100% sure on that one. So if anyone knows that factoid, please let me know in the comments. But as we can see, what's very interesting about this game is that despite how long this game's been out and how much it has attracted this hardcore audience, it has some massive churn to it. Now, I think part of this has to do with these clear rates, or more specifically with these achievements. And Super Meat Boy doesn't have too many progression-based achievements. What we can kind of tell is that as you play through the normal game, you are going to be unlocking some of these challenges just by the default of playing them. But as we can see with Super Meat Boy, the churn rate is just serious for this game. And I think a lot of this comes down, well, obviously, to the difficulty of it. And despite Edmund, I think, really attracting a very hardcore and passionate following, how many people actually play through his games, though, I think is a far different story. So, as we do each week, we look at our stabilization rate. We're looking for when it drops down. The difference between achievements goes from like 20, 40, or 30, 32.1 right here to like 5 or 6. Yeah, I am very surprised by that. So if we go by stabilization, we can say it stabilizes at 11.8%. So, yeah, that is probably one of the poorest stabilization rates I think I've seen in a game. That may actually be a record here. So if it's stabilized at 11.8, we'll round that up to 12%. That means it has 88% churn and 12% stable. And I think this also goes to show that when we get to kind of the nuts and bolts of the game, or more specifically, when we kind of peel away at recognition, how big the game has gotten, celebrity stats, and so on, gameplay tells a far different story. And as Pony said in chat right there, in terms of actually beating the game, not even 100%, but just simply beating it, we are at 6.5%. And that is also very low as well. We'll round that up to 7. So if we take 7 divided by 12 times 100, the core base of the people who remained is 58%. So the people who did stick with this game, or who managed to survive all the way through all the craziness, it did have a pretty good core base. But that is some terrible churn. Now, again, one of the problems with Super Meat Boy, as in terms of its completion rates, is that a lot of this game, or a lot of these achievements, are optional. And that makes it far harder for us to really be able to examine what this game has done. And again, as we get further down, was the kid the one that was the nightmare? Does anyone remember? Mm-hmm. Medium well. Not sure what medium well is. I did not play the kid's Xmas. I'm not even sure that is. I think that could have been an optional level that was added on later. But yeah, 2.6. Here's something that I find very weird about these achievements. Do you guys see something very off about these completion rates? There's something very sus. We'll see if anyone can guess it. For those of you watching this recorder right now, see if you can figure out what is very weird that I'm looking at right now. If you give up, more people 100% the game than they beat the Dark World. And I am kind of confused about that. I wonder if that is a glitch or something going on with how these achievements are being tabulated. 100% is more hard. Yeah, like, I beat the Dark World. That was hell. Not to be confused with other hell. Again, these achievements right here, I wonder if they are for... I'm not sure. It could be... It's not deathless. Because that's what these Needle Boy, Squirrel Boy, and so on are for. I just wonder if these achievements down here are just like the speedrunners going through this. I don't know if it could be offline, because usually the second you load up to Steam, it would, update everything about it. But, again, I think with Super Meat Boy, what's very interesting, I think we've seen far more technical platformers be released over the last 10 years. Spends a little... Oh, those are speedrun challenges. Thank you. Oh, God. Beat it in 320 seconds. 2, 4... 1, 2, 3, 4... What is it, like a little under 5 minutes to beat every level? Oh my goodness. And this is, I think, another very interesting point that the majority of the achievements in Super Meat Boy are both optional and very, very challenging. I don't think I even have most of the bandages in Super Meat Boy, to be honest with everyone. But I can say that I at least beat the Light World and the Dark World. Now, these are the glitch achievements for beating those incredibly annoying optional levels. I did manage to get the kid. Is that the guy from VVVVVV? Yep, V times 6. I didn't know he actually had a name. One of these days I should try and go back to playing V times 6. Yeah, I don't even know how long it took me to beat Rapture. And I can tell you that I never finished Super Bandage Girls levels as well. But to be fair, most people didn't even get that far. So the question I think about this is, would Super Meat Boy have done better or worse in terms of completion and approachability if it had any kind of assist modes? And that's a very interesting point. A part of me would say that it would help to some extent, but I think in terms of the overall improvement of this game, I don't think they would. I think it runs into that same issue, as Celeste. That even if you have assist modes, they're not really going to move people through these games if they get stuck. And with something like Super Meat Boy, what's interesting again is that we can't really do the 2-hour check. And again, this game was released in 2010, so there wouldn't even have been a 2-hour refund policy on to begin with. Yeah, that could certainly be it. I really wish there were actual stage-based achievements. I'm kind of surprised there wasn't, to just beat each chapter of the game. And as a quick tangent, I just want to see, does the end is nigh? And look at that difference in reviews, 2172 versus 10,000. Does the end is nigh have clear rates? Yes, it does. I may have to add the end is nigh to this list for another show. I don't want to turn into a Super Meat Boy end is nigh kind of play. But kind of what we've seen, I think Pony alluded to this as well, is that there is a difference between buying a game to either like it or appreciate it, and buying a game because you are going to push the hell through it and you are going to beat this title. And as a legitimate tangent that I want to do really fast, let's see how Celeste, because I think Celeste actually beat Super Meat Boy. Now again, to be fair, Celeste's achievements are more stage-based, so it does give us a little bit better frame. But Celeste stabilized at, well, we could say at, 50% if we round this up. Well, actually, no. 49, 30, 40. Well, it's still stabilized a bit higher than that. No, actually, yeah, it did stabilize at, we'll say, 50%. And then the clear rate for this game, or the absolute clear rate, is 7.3. Because that is the one for beating, I think, Chapter 7. And then this is for beating Chapter 8. So, surprisingly, more of the people who bought Celeste actually beat the game compared to Super Meat Boy. And that is a very interesting point. I think, in a way, the assist mode may have helped this game, or helped out Celeste, because it is far more technical than Super Meat Boy ever got. I did beat the end is nigh, and that ending was a nightmare, especially when you have limited lives to do it in. So, in a way, it is kind of like a little bit of proof that the assist modes did help Celeste, I think, more in terms of completion. And I don't know about that, Pony. If Celeste is more balanced with a smoother curve, it starts. It may start easier, but I think it requires a lot more on the player very fast. Like Super Meat Boy, it's very much learn the physics. What would be very interesting, and again, we can't see it here, would be like the super advanced challenges in Celeste. So we kind of can see it with the B-side, C-side stuff. Getting the hearts, getting strawberries, and so on. So in a way, Celeste may prove the point that the assist mode does matter. But it still didn't help the game in terms of full-on, getting people all the way through to the end. But again, to be fair, the goal isn't to get 100% of the people through. It's a stop churn. And as we can see with Super Meat Boy, the churn definitely happens, but we can't get a very clear picture of it. Which also means that this is a very quick episode. I was kind of expecting this one to be longer. And probably when we get to the end is nigh, that will probably be an even more involved one. Because the end is nigh is very weird in terms of its physics compared to Celeste, They Bleed Pixels, and Super Meat Boy. And as an interesting aside, since we're doing like all of like Enmin and Team Meat stuff right now, well, we actually can't look at Super Meat Boy Forever because it's not out yet. But I would be very interested to see, when the time comes, how many people went through Super Meat Boy Forever. Because that one just did not click for me as a platformer fan. And we can rant and rave about that one, I think, until the cows come home. But I think with that, let's move on. It was released on Epic, but it still has that 1 year, exclusivity on Epic before it goes to Steam. Let me clear up the grades really fast. There we go. So, for the second game of our list here, we are looking at They Bleed Pixels. This is another very challenging 2D platformer with a focus on combat and chaining combos. It is definitely more technical than Super Meat Boy, but does that make it better or worse than it? Hey Smoke, I'm doing well. How about you? So we have 1963 in terms of reviews compared to, where was our friend Meat Boy here? 21,075. So we have, that's Celeste. So we have probably a smaller consumer base of They Bleed Pixels compared to Super Meat Boy and arguably Celeste as well. But does this game have really good completion rates? Usually for games that have smaller audiences, the churn rates are usually smaller or fewer because of the fact that they usually attract a far more hardcore fan base. But not always. So let's see what we have here. So again, in terms of the ever popular truth that a lot of people will quit games for very simple reasons, 12% of the people rounding up who bought They Bleed Pixels never bothered to do the tutorial. Yeah, and again, for newcomers watching this, as we've said, clear rates or completion rates and so on, they will tell a very different story compared to YouTubers, streamers, reviewers, journalists, and all that. And we have seen games that 13 to 20% of the people who will just start the game up will not even bother to even do the basic tutorial. Which makes me wonder how many people got the RTFM achievement for Ironclad Tactics from Zachtronics, which was literally look at a card that gives you the instructions for the game. So, as you can see, we do have churn. And we have some major points here. So we go from 87 to 68 to 63. So, as you can see, the churn is very much real. Yes, I do. And Zach used that as his achievement. So, I shouldn't get in trouble for that. I'm just quoting what Zach put into his game. So, again, whenever we have hard games, be it They Bleed Pixels, La Mulania, Spelunky, Super Meat Boy, and so on, these games will predominantly have major churn at the start. Because even if they have hardcore fan bases, getting people through that hump is what is often the major point. And this is something that I spoke with Tomo about when we were talking about difficulty as a tool and what difficulty means to the player base. That your goal when it comes to approachability, improving your UI and your UX, isn't to get 100% of your player base to beat a game. That it will never happen in the history of histories of the game industry. But what we want is to get more people past the initial hurdles. And if we look at They Bleed Pixels here, very much Chapter 2, and I'm sorry, Dream 2 in Chapter 1. Wait, Dream 2, Chapter 2. Yeah, that's right. So it's Dream 2, do all the chapters, Dream 3, do all the chapters, and so on. So Dream 1, and then... So Dream 2 is kind of... where the real Dark Souls begins for They Bleed Pixels. So what we're trying to figure out is, why did so many of the percentage of the people who bought this game stopped right here? Now, I remember Dream 2 is done when things get harder. And what I find very interesting is this is the Resident Evil 7 Learn How to Block achievement all over again. Because the dash over spikes is pretty much required. You need to do this in order to proceed. And 38% of the people did not do it. So we keep checking here. I just want to make sure there's no other major spikes. So, to be fair, the game did stabilize at, well, we could say 49%. People don't like spikes. So we have 49% churn, which means we stabilized at 51%, Which, in all honesty, that's not bad. Especially for hardcore platformers. If you can... Yep. Mm-hmm. Like, if you can stabilize at least 50%, I would say that's pretty much minimum. Usually we want to see like 60 to 70% stabilization. And this is not bad. Again, when we talk about hardcore platformers, even though they'll have massive churn, once it stabilizes, it will usually stabilize on the higher side of things. And we can get a far clearer picture of They Bleed Pixels compared to Super Meat Boy, again, because it uses progression-based achievements. And while I know a lot of people don't like having, beat level 1, beat level 2, you finished the tutorial, you read the manual, it's, I think, very useful for developers, for analytics purposes, to have these kinds of bread and butter achievements in your game. Because it allows you to really spot. Well, let's take a look. Now again, we're not talking, it is dropping, but we're talking about massive churn. So that'll be more than like 7% from one achievement to the next. So 49 to 45, 45 to 39, 36, 35, 32, 31, 30, 26. So it did stabilize. It's still dropping down. Let's see, 35. Novice, that is that. Let's see. Here, chapter 2. Yeah, you may be right here. Yeah. We keep going down. Now, some of these, again, you're doing them just by playing the game. Like, you're going to learn the drop attack. Yeah. 35 to 26. Yeah. 26 to 19. Which would be about 7. 3. Yeah. Yeah, so I think you are right. Given the fact that we're talking about progression as the focus, as opposed to just these kinds of bonus ones, then that means we go from 87 to 63, 63 to 49, 49 to 35, 35 to 26, 26 to 19. Yeah. Which is going to affect this quite a bit. Which gives us 81. And unfortunately, it is how these things happen. Now, with They Bleed Pixels, I know one very possible reason for this churn, and that is the checkpoint system. How the game works is that you build up kind of points. As you kill enemies, you get combos, and then those points at certain thresholds give you the ability to place your own checkpoint. So the game does not have fixed checkpoints. As in, you get halfway through a level, you beat a hard point, you get checkpoint. Instead, you set them up. So some people will set them up before they do something very difficult. Some will set up after they do something difficult. But until you checkpoint, nothing is fixed in this game. And yet, you can't place a checkpoint if like a sphere around your character has anything dangerous in it. Nor can you do it if you're in an auto-scroller. And the game has quite a few of those. So if it's stabilized at 19.1, and these achievements right here, the Dream 1, Full Harvest, All Pages, those are completionist achievements. And we won't really be counting them as much. So, clear all pages, get A rank. Oh god, actually, no. This is still going down, isn't it? Dream 3 to 19. It's still within the threshold. So, Dream 13.5, 10.2, 8.1. Oh god, what is the actual clear rate of this game? 5.6. Woo. Finish the bleed pixels. I think the end may be post content. Yes, it is insanely difficult. So that means it has a clear rate of 4.7. We'll round that up to 5. So 5 divided by 19 times 100 gives it 26.3 of a core fan base of the people who bought this game. Did I do that right? Yeah. Math is difficult, I know. And again, we're not counting the churn rate. We're counting when the game stabilizes. And again, for people watching who don't know what these mean, the churn rate basically represents the people who you can't really rely on to be returning fans or coming back to a game. Stabilization rate is a good guarantee that those people are fans and will come back. And then the clear rate or the core base is the percentage of people who bought the game, who survived the stabilization, and will most definitely be a fan of your next game or a fan of this title. And 4.7. Now I'm just very curious. And clear the game. Where are you? Did I miss it again? Here it is. 6.5. Now again, though, more people obviously played Super Meat Boy than they did They Bleed Pixels, sadly. Yeah. I just wonder where I could fit that. Maybe if I do like a little intro, I can explain it there. Because I've been thinking about just having an actual, like, recorded intro. And, putting that at the start of all of these. That way, anyone new watching will kind of get the complete gist of what the show is without me having to explain it. Yeah, that may be good. Like a 30-second intro that will go over this. So, with They Bleed Pixels, let me get back over here. And, these down here, these are bonus challenges. When you get enough pages in They Bleed Pixel, you unlock these kinds of, I don't know what I would call them, like fan levels, but like these bonus maps that take place like with a different aesthetic and things like that. Treasure. Complete. And these are kind of like bonus. Every level has bonus challenges, and that's what like the novice and the advanced stuff are for. Pull the enemies and Sarah's Bleed Stardust. Get all pages. I do wonder if there's any achievements here that nobody ever got in this game. Get all the pages. Oh, that's right. The end is the final chapter, and then they count the second you finish the end, you get the you beat the game achievement. I will never, ever, ever in the history of this game get a don't die achievement. Oh, yes, and I forget if they count if you knock them into spikes as killing them. I think it does, but I don't know for sure. Complete. Oh, God, complete the chapter. Complete every level. Still going down. And again, this game has a ton of achievements. And the reason it has a ton of achievements is because they're all progression based. Or challenge based as well. Never get an S rank, that's for sure. We're almost to the bottom, people. Will there be any 0% achievements? Let's see. Oh yeah, I'm never doing this one. Nope. There were no zeros. Speedrun experience 0.666 in under 10 minutes? Eh? Wait, so they beat the entire game in 10 minutes? Oh my god. If anyone actually achieved that feat to the 0.4%, my metaphorical hat is off to you. But again, this is a great... Oh, just that chapter. There's a chapter called 0.66. So, what is the actual speedrun achievement? Here it is, 0.5%. So, 0.5% did all the speedrun challenges. So, to them, you rock. And being the... Oh my god, the final level in under 6.5 minutes. So, again, 0.5% of this fan base, they are hardcore. Maybe even a little bit higher than that. But less than 1%, we can certainly say, are the true They Bleed Pixels super fans. So the question is, what can we learn about these churns? Now, one thing that I always found a little weird about They Bleed Pixels is that it is a game that makes use of directional base attacks. So it's kind of like you stand still, you do an attack, tap forward, you do an attack, tap down, tap up. So there is far more of a combat system in this game compared to the other platformers that we looked at on this week's show. And I think that does rub people the wrong way. How many percent of the 0.4? I'm going to say... That's a good question. Huh? We can actually do the math here. So we have a core base... Well, we have a clear rate of 5%. So we have 0.4 divided by 5. I'm going to, like, break my calculator doing this. So 8% of the people who cleared the game actually beat all or got the super achievements. So again, that is very tiny. So could there have been ways to improve the UX and the approachability? I think without, upsetting the core gameplay of this game would be very difficult. I could see maybe having a mode or having the option to turn on infinite achievements. Or, I'm sorry, not infinite achievements, infinite checkpoints. Could have done a whole lot to this game. Because one of the challenges that you have is that sometimes you have to decide between using a checkpoint after you do an incredibly hard optional challenge, or keep going forward, risking dying, and repeating that super optional hardcore challenge. But I would say as another good point that it is really great to have progression-based achievements like this. And as you can see, as the game gets harder, we're obviously losing more and more players. Now, in terms of where this falls on the 2-hour line, as we talk about, really, like, 2 hours could... If you're decent at the game, you should be able to make it to at least, I would say, Dream 2, Dream 3 in 2 hours. So, I'm sure a lot of people didn't even make it to 2 hours in this game. Especially so many of them quitting during the prologue. And again, that is unfortunately to be expected, because very early on, people are going to decide whether they're in it for this game, or if all the design elements that they don't like are too much of a hurdle to get through. And I think the combination of the fighting, as well as the, create your own checkpoint system, probably drove people in one stage? Really? I may have just gotten good at the game. But I mean, each individual level should be, what, like 10 to 20 minutes? Well, if we count the entire dream, maybe at least Dream 2 you should be able to get to in 2 hours. Well, you just keep dying and then you just keep creating more checkpoints. And this is, again, I think, another example of a game that is very much... It's easier as you get better at it. I know that's very weird to say, but what I mean is it very much follows in line with shmup rules. That as long as you don't die, you keep your points... Hey Mojo, which lets you do more checkpoints, which makes it easier to progress. Like, if you're struggling with the combat system, you're going to fight for those checkpoint options, which in turn makes it a lot harder to play. And I wonder if it would have just been better to either establish checkpoints, or maybe tie the checkpoints just to enemy kills. As in, instead of it being, every time you fill that score meter, you get a checkpoint. Let's say every 5 enemies you kill, you get a checkpoint option. Was it... Didn't you bounce off of saws as well in this one? Or was the entire... No, you did get health in it, right? I'm pretty sure. I don't think it was all one-hit kills. Because if it was, then... the game is far more masochistic than I remember. No, you had health, because I remember having so much of a nightmare with those shamblers. The enemy that you have to hit, and then they teleport behind you, and you have to adjust when they teleport. That was a horrific nightmare for me to play. Shambler. And I think, again, that whenever you combine elements of different genres, it adds to the churn and the complexity. Because you have the checkpoint system, you have combat, and you have hardcore platforming all rolled into one. And if I remember right, yeah, that's right. As you fight... Oh, yeah. What? There's a lot of annoyance in Fably Pixels. There really was. If I remember right, you had to also use the combat as a form of platforming. Because you can air dash into an enemy, kill them, restore your dash to then dash into another enemy, and you repeat that over a gap of spikes. And here's a question. Here's my question for everyone watching this live record right now. Which game do you think is the most technical? Super Meat Boy, Celeste, or They Bleed Pixels? Because I am honestly like stuck here between them. I make everything look easy, don't I? It's all, it's all that magic. That BioWare magic. Yeah. And again, it's one of those things that it's a tough question, I think. Like, you're either going to gravitate very quickly towards one of the three, or you're going to have to take some thought to it. And yeah, that is the point. Like, Celeste, all the depth of Celeste is built into one system, the platforming. And while it is, I would say the platforming in Celeste may be a touch more advanced than They Bleed Pixels. Especially if you're trying to perform the advanced mechanics like wave dashing, the dash diagonally into a wall to then jump and propel yourself around. You have, I think, They Bleed Pixels has a lot more moving parts to it than Celeste did. And again, it's very interesting when we look at how these systems are combined. And it is that risk you have to worry about as a developer when you're mixing genres or mixing systems that normally you don't have to deal with. If you're playing a strategy game that you also have to jump into first-person shooter combat, that's going to be a far harder sell compared to a game that was one or the other. And if They Bleed Pixels focus either on the combat or the platforming, it probably would have had at least a little bit more of a stabilization. Probably a lot more, honestly. And again, punishing. And that is, I think, a really good point. Punishment in games is one of the biggest churn points when it comes to these titles. The more punishing it is to fail, the more it's going to feel like a punch in the face when you do. I guess I'm the one who wants to play them. With Super Meat Boy, death is, 5 seconds at most of loss. And there are times that you will die like 10 times in 8 seconds. Start, die, start, die. Start, die. Start, die. You make it, start, die. The BioWare magic meme was when people were saying that they thought that Anthem was going to turn out well because of, BioWare has this magic that they can somehow pull out a win no matter what they could do. But yeah, it's pretty much like a Super Meat Boy experience. Die, die, die. Make it, die. Die, die, die. And yeah, that's even if you're good at this game. I've watched speedrunners who will still just have 4 or 5 incidental deaths when they start the level. And what makes this work is that even though you're dying a lot in Super Meat Boy, there's not a lot of loss in that game. Celeste, I would say Celeste is more punishing in that respect. If you guys remember when I played the final chapter and that 10-minute gauntlet, Kaizo section that you have to do perfectly, where you have to restart the entire section, yeah, that was close to me raging at a game, I think, right there. And yeah, They Bleed Pixels, and again, the length of the levels is supposed to be balanced by the instant checkpoints. We don't have to worry about setting checkpoints. The player is going to do it for them. But therein lies the problem. Is that... Oh, God, yeah, don't remind me of that one. But the problem with the kind of manual checkpoint system is that players may be bad at setting up checkpoints. And don't forget, if you're playing the game blind, you're not going to know what is the hard section in They Bleed Pixels. For those of you who play the game, you may remember there's a section where you have to do it's like you're like on the wall here, or let me do it like this. You're on the wall, you have to drop, dash, jump up, and then grab the wall here, and you have to like progress through like an entire section like that. All the while that if you fall, you're going to hit spikes and die. And I think at one point they throw enemies at you. So you have to dodge them while you're doing the platforming, while you're avoiding the spikes. And remember, you can't checkpoint unless you are on solid ground and there's no danger around you. So you mess up at any one of those spikes, you're repeating that whole section. And then don't forget, if you don't have any more checkpoints, you're going to have to, if you die, you're going to repeat that whole thing over again. And then probably throw your keyboard out. Path of Pain. Is that the Colosseum challenge? Or is that the White Palace? If that's what people are describing it as. Yes. Mm-hmm. I think ultimately what would have been, a better system. That I do not remember. I beat the White Palace. I know that one for sure. Yeah, you better. Games like They Bleed Pixels could be why we may need keyboard insurance. What I think would have been a fairer system for They Bleed Pixels could have make it time-based. On top, like time-based as a backup to the score base. If you remember when we play a lot of the Artifex Mundi games, hidden object titles, they'll have a time-based hint system. That if you're stuck on something for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, something like that, the game will give you a free hint. And I think something that could work with They Bleed Pixels, that if you're all out checkpoint juice or checkpoint options, that if you go, let's say, 60 seconds, the game will just give you a damn checkpoint. Because when you combine lengthy levels with difficult sections, with combat, with a limited checkpoint system, and that is another important point. You only get the checkpoints by building up your score. And you only build your score by either collecting those MacGuffins or killing enemies. So there are a fixed number of checkpoints. And again, this is another point that needs to be said. I would bet you any amount of money that if we were to make a post on the They Bleed Pixels Steam forums, during the heights when a lot of people are checking it out, saying, why can't the checkpoints be automatic? Or just give us free checkpoints or unlimited checkpoints? People will say, get good. I made it through the game without dying, so why can't you? It's easy. Just don't die. Just get all the combos. You have more than enough checkpoints. And again, that is how we lead to these games becoming very niche. Now, I don't know if the developer is watching this or they even know who I am, but I would love to know that if given the option now, would they change the checkpoint system? Because I think, again, that the checkpoints could very well be, one of the biggest churn problems with They Bleed Pixels. Because as the game gets longer, it gets harder. As it gets harder, you're going to rely more on checkpoints. And if you don't, you're losing more and more progress. And you have to, again, be aware that there will always be churn in these games. What we don't want is to go from, technically we even start at 100%. We start at 87%. And the basic tutorial, what is that? 5 minutes of your time to beat the basic tutorial of this game, maybe 10? So we lost a lot. We lost a decent amount of people even before level 1 is done. So we go 87, 63, 49. Like, this is what you don't want to see. Again, what you want to see is going 87, 86, 85.6, 84, and that kind of rate. Because you will have, again, there will always be churn. You don't want it to be massive churn. Because, again, we can point to this as a very clear difficulty spikes for people who didn't want to play this game, or even just UI UX complaints. Namely, probably with fighting and checkpointing. And I think this is also another really good lesson. And again, why punishment has to be very measured in terms of your design. Because the more the player has to lose, it's the opposite, right? The more the player has to lose, the more gut-wrenching it's going to be when that happens. And a lot of people, I think, will quit a game with a huge punishment system even before they actually achieve it or they experience it. Because it's that thought of, oh no, I'm going to lose 40 minutes of my time, an hour of my time, 20 hours of my time, that it will just completely dovetail their experience. And it is, in a way, kind of like the rich getting richer. It's the same issue we see with shmups and a lot of arcade-based games, that the systems are only there to punish new players. Somebody, and like for those of you who watch me play They Bleed Pixels, I can play it relatively well. Hey, maybe we'll do it for one of these streams, do another run through of the masochism. But once you're good at these games, punishment systems don't matter to you. It's the same thing with Sekiro, Dark Souls, pick any roguelite kind of game. That once you're good at the game, why should you care about, dying and wasting 30 minutes of your time? You can beat the game. Who cares? And then that creates that attitude of, well, if I can do it, why can't you S-rank every level in They Bleed Pixels? I never S-rank the game for anyone new watching, and I will never S-rank the entire game. I may be borderline masochistic, but there are limits, I think. We all have those limits, right? So again, like the 1%, the tenths of the percent of the people who've made it through They Bleed Pixels, they probably don't care about the checkpoint system at all. They don't care about the pain points or the difficulty spikes. And, good for them. But that would be the fan base that if they push back... if they push back on UI and UX concerns and approachability or accessibility, you really shouldn't listen to them from a development standpoint. Because yes, they may be your hardcore fans, but they represent in the 10th of a percentage of the people who bought the game. Not even a full percent. A 10th of... We're in the 0.8 percentile of people who play the game. And while you shouldn't listen to people who say, I don't like a game because it's a platformer, what we want to do is figure out ways to get this churn rate down. We don't want 81% churn in a game. I've seen other games that have had that rate as well. And that will always point to something not working for people, or ways of improving the UI, or in this case, just the UX and the approachability. And my question for those of you who did manage to beat They Bleed Pixels, ultimately, what did you think of the game? Did you enjoy the design of it? Did you beat it just out of, spite? I will beat this game so I can, shut this game off for being so difficult? And I'm just curious, again, what are the thoughts of the hardcore player base? I'll make a slight exception. And it is so difficult to try and make a game that's balanced, because you have to always worry about, am I betraying my core audience? Or am I, trying to make this game more welcoming to a larger audience of people? Because if you make your game, if you completely... Yeah. And I've gone that way with a lot of hardcore games as well. But if you try to make your game too streamlined, or I should say too simplistic, and you remove why people want to play in the first place, then you have that opposite problem, that you'll attract people who are just going to play for a little bit and stop playing it, and your hardcore base will leave. But the goal of all of this is to figure out ways to get both groups happy. And approachability options, assist modes, things like that, again, your hardcore fan base, they will never touch them. And that's fine, because it's not meant for them. And I would say ultimately, again, that to wrap things up for this week's show, be very aware of punishment mechanics. And again, punishment can be broadly defined by the loss of something. Loss of time, loss of progress. The more the player feels like they are losing when they fail, the more of a punch of a gut it is to play that game. How many people want to play a game where every death could reset 20 to 30 minutes of their playtime that they'll then have to repeat? Now again, in a roguelike where death is a new run, that's a different story. You're getting a unique experience. But with They Bleed Pixels and other kind of set games, you lose 20 minutes of progress, you are repeating the exact same 20 minutes, or the exact 5 minutes of a brutally difficult section. And that can be very hard. And again, people who get the game and master it, it's not bothering them at all. If you're good enough to beat each level without using a checkpoint, you don't care, how annoying the checkpoint system or how difficult the game is. You are beyond that. But this is again why UX and approachability are so important in order to try and stem the churn rate. And even just changing the checkpoint system, I think, would have done a lot to get people through this game. Yep. And people really don't like that. Again, the beauty of Super Meat Boy, and to a lesser extent Celeste, in the shorter sections, is that death is 5 to 10 seconds of loss. When it gets into the minutes, that's when people will oftentimes just say, enough is enough. Because who wants to have to repeat 5 to 10 minutes of the same content over and over again? It started to really bother me in Doom Eternal. The Ancient Ones Part 1. That the difficulty of those arena encounters are so high that you are repeating 5 to 10 minutes of brutally difficult fighting to then get back to that one encounter that you lost, and then that kills you. You have to repeat the whole run or the whole arena over again. And like even with Dark Souls, they've gotten better with having checkpoints or opening up shortcuts before boss fights. So you're not running 20 minutes from one end to the end to one end to the other, but maybe a minute. But even that 1 minute can be very annoying. People don't want to waste time. They don't want to feel like what they just did doesn't matter, or what they're doing right now, yeah, is just, it's just like office work. It's placeholder. Mm-hmm. And the beauty about Neo is you can just sometimes just run around all the enemies, like I did go into that owl fight. Oh, excuse me. But we are past the hour. I think that will do it for this week's episode of Completion Critiques. And if you would like to vote for which pairings of games I do next, be sure to check out the Patreon, as all Patreon supporters get to decide what games I will pick from my list. If you're new, duly liking, subscribing, smashing bells, and whatnot, check out our Discord as well, link down below. If you want to catch these shows live, I do them Tuesdays around 4 p.m. ET here on the channel, and the recording parts go up as I have time for them. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. And until next time, take care.